Evening, everybody. I am doing an IG Live with James Dowler, who's known as the Breath Guy. And so I'm going to invite him to join us. Where is he? Breathe. Let's breathe with James. Breath. Maybe it was breath with James. And he is going to talk Tell me how you all are, everyone. I can't see him. Where is he? James. Breathe with. There we are. Is he going to join me? Except. There you are. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. How you doing?
Hi, everybody. And hi, James. It's so nice of you to join us. And everyone who's joined us, there's a lot of you already. So obviously you need a lot of input from James because you have really accessed a way of us learning how to manage our stress levels, how to regulate our systems through breath. Do you want to talk a bit about how that works, what the stress does to our autonomic nervous system, and how you can use breath as a circuit breaker?
Yeah, sure thing. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in on Monday evening.
Yeah, so nice.
So yeah, I guess to understand a little bit about, stress physiology and breath, one needs a basic understanding of something in the body, which we call the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is the sort of background operating system in the body that governs everything that happens automatically. So your heart rate, your digestion, the regulation of your blood sugar, and your breath are all part of your autonomic nervous system. So think about anything that happens automatically without you having conscious control of it. Now, within your autonomic nervous system, there are two branches. You have the sympathetic branch of your nervous system, which is the mobilization branch of your nervous system, and the parasympathetic branch.
The bit that goes up.
Exactly. You can think about it like the accelerator in a car. And then the parasympathetic branch of your nervous system, which is the slowing down branch of your nervous system. So a little bit like the brake. When we feel in danger or stressed, what tends to happen is something called the fight or flight mechanism within the sympathetic branch. And freeze. The interesting thing about, and we can talk about this, is that fight or flight lies within the sympathetic branch of our nervous system. When we get stressed, we tend to go into this fight or flight energy. If that is then too much for our body, that is when we go into a freeze state. And the freeze state is actually part of the parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
So the sort of slightly, old school understanding of the autonomic nervous system was that we had sort of two branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The work of Stephen Porges, and specifically Polyvagal Theory, shows that we do have a parasympathetic and a sympathetic nervous system, but within the parasympathetic, the vagus nerve has two branches in and of itself. So we have two branches within the parasympathetic nervous system, one of which is our ventral vagus, which is otherwise known as our social engagement system, which is the part of our vagus nerve which is active when we feel safe and socially engaged. But then we have something called our dorsal vagus, which is otherwise known as our shutdown, our freeze. So when we feel stressed, we tend to go into this fight or flight. If this fight or flight is then too much for our body, that's when we then shut down and freeze.
So if I'm translating what you're saying, and a lot of people have joined, which is so lovely. Hello, everyone. And quite a few people have said, I feel very stressed. I'm just recovering from illness. You know, I really need to understand this. And we might talk about illness in particular, actually. But So the autonomic, unlike your central nervous system, which is your kind of lungs, your heart, your kidneys, not nervous system, your central, what's it called?
Mm-hmm. Essentially,
Your,
you've got your central nervous system, and then your autonomic nervous system is
yes,
part of your peripheral nervous system.
yeah. It's wired evolutionarily to kind of meet what comes towards you. And some of that will be external forces like a tiger attacking you. But some of them are much more, I think, in sort of the social environment that we're in, is the day-to-day of what our thoughts. So we read something and our thoughts give us a version of the tiger, don't they? So what you're saying is that our response goes up in response to a demand. And if we regulate it, and we'll talk about your breath in a minute, how to do that, you can wind it down. So then you keep regulated, you keep homeostasis. And in the Stephen Porges theory, the polyvagal system is your sympathetic goes up in response to the demand, and ventral is where we connect. And so you and I on ventral vagus nerve now, we're connecting, we're seeing, we're thinking, you can process information, we're aware of what's going on. But if we get super hyper in response to our thoughts or what's happening to us, we can either go into hyper sympathetic or dorsal, where we cut off. So you can go to both states. Have I got that right?
Completely, yeah. So our first response when we tend to feel stress, is to go into that fight or flight. And then if that flight or flight is just too much for our system, it's too overwhelming, that's when we then shut down and freeze.
And when we shut down and freeze, we're kind of locked out of ourselves as well, aren't we? And we're locked out of connection to others. And it's connection to others that actually enables us to manage a lot of the difficulties, because then we feel kind of frozen and cold and alone.
Completely.
And we don't use our wisdom or our knowledge of what we need to support us. So you can get in a terrible loop.
Exactly, yeah. So fight or flight tends to look like sort of hypervigilance, anxiety. Dorsal shutdown tends to look more like immobilization, dissociation, withdrawing from the world. And interestingly, people tend to have a tendency towards one or the other. Like speaking from my personal experience, I definitely have a tendency to fall into freeze, and have had a tendency to sort of isolate and withdraw as a result. And that tends to be quite symptomatic with someone who has a tendency to fall into freeze effectively.
So when you talk about tendency, that's so helpful, isn't it? And my translation of that would be that we all learned a coping mechanism when we were young. And that coping mechanism is the default mode that we turn to when we're in extremis. And we can't change that default. It's wired in us. But what you're about to raise awareness of is what we can do in response to that can shift our system. And Gerard Berger saying fear and long COVID are here for you. And people have talked a lot about other illnesses they've had that have really given them a lot of stress. So do you want to talk about how you can shift your system from either dorsal or hypersympathetic?
Yeah, so the way the breath comes in specifically is in relation to being able to down regulate a nervous system and take one out of a fight or flight response. So when we take conscious control of the breath, remembering that the breath is the only part of our autonomic nervous system that's both automatic and under our conscious control.
Do you know, I've never heard someone say that before. Isn't that brilliant? It's automatic and it's under our conscious control. That's brilliant.
Which is where its power lies, and its ability as a result to shift your autonomic state, and specifically to down regulate the nervous system and take us out of what might be an underlying fight or flight energy into a slightly more relaxed and slightly more settled state. The nuance in relation to the style of breathwork that I teach is if one is in freeze or shut down, it might be that they need a little bit more activation in their system to take them out of freeze. And that might be where in my personal opinion, the best way to come out of freeze is going on a walk with a friend, because you're engaging the ventral vagus, the social
And you're
engagement
shifting
system.
your body and you're
But
with someone.
you're also bringing a little bit of healthy sympathetic energy online as well. So you've got that blend of ventral and sympathetic, which can be very helpful to take someone out of freeze. The breath is
But then
specifically...
I would add, having done the walk, then do something like your breath work to connect you with yourself. So one will take you up a gear, and then the other one you can expand it to kind of feel calmer altogether.
Yeah, completely makes sense. And I think this is, for me, the real skill is being able to sort of like map and understand one's autonomic state, where they are lying within that. And this is all about sort of developing a somatic awareness and a better understanding of oneself, not only intellectually, but also physiologically, and specifically neurophysiologically as well. And through that understanding, the practices and the techniques to engage in when and where one relevantly needs to in relation to shifting that specific state, if they do want to shift that state, if that makes sense.
So that makes sense. Can I just pause you and ask some of these questions? So Ruby and Pearl says, but I can get into dorsal with some people who act as triggers, but be okay normal with other people. Have you come across that? Definitely.
Yeah, so I think this is, the breath is something that we refer to as self-regulation. Being around other people is something we refer to as co-regulation. So when we come into this world, we are reliant on other people. We are social beings. We are socially wired. And depending on the experiences that we have earlier on in life, or as we move through our life, depending on whether we feel safe around those people, we feel seen around those people, we feel held around those people, whether we do or whether we don't will then have an impact on how our relationships then map out and shape further on in life. And
the body remembers, and the body holds the score. So with Ruby's case, with some people who are triggers, she probably had an experience of threat, that she felt attacked, or there was something very difficult happened. So her body would remember that and shut down faster than she could even think it through. And then with other people, she would feel safe.
Yeah, which is on a nervous system level, and it's a term coined by Stephen Porges. It's calls it neuroception, which is effectively your nervous system scanning your environment for cues of safety or cues of danger, and shifting your autonomic state unconsciously, depending on what it finds as a result of experiences that you've been through in the past.
And so to go back to the dorsal state where you suggested people go for a walk, there's two people, Nature and Nick, and Etty47. What if you can't walk due to illness and ME?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the thing that comes to mind for me is visualization, and perhaps bringing on a visualization of something slightly more active. So your brain doesn't actually know the difference between something happening in your imagination and something actually happening in your physical reality. So it might be that you visualize yourself walking, or you visualize yourself doing something slightly more upregulating, and seeing how that shifts your autonomic state. I know that when I do visualization practices, or when I have done in the past, the feeling I tend to get from them is quite like an uplifting, upregulating feeling in the body, especially if I'm visualizing and imagining something that I want to step into. So that might be something to play with. You can
Could you do something with your arms, like
exactly.
a resistance training or something?
For like sure. That? Yeah, for sure. I think the sensitivity in relation to ME and CFS is how much one can do physically. And I know from sort of, I'm not sure if you're aware of sort of like the work of like Annie Hopper and DNRS and the Gupta program. A lot of that stuff is around sort of like visualization and rewiring the limbic system, and can be quite helpful for someone who is in that sort of shutdown freeze response with.
That's so helpful. Maybe when I post this, when I put it on the save, you could add the link to them. That would be amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you talk about the breath being both autonomic and within our control, can you describe how that can take you out of these different states?
Yeah, so say we're in a fight or flight response, something's happened, been triggered, and we've moved into this high tone sympathetic state. When we slow the breath down, the process of slowing the breath down activates something called your vagus nerve, the main pathway of your parasympathetic nervous system. Your vagus nerve secretes a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine that slows the heart. And when your heart rate slows, a signal of safety is sent to your brain, which means all the systems in your body begin to relax and begin to let go.
And safety is the key, isn't it? That's what we're looking for, is this sense of internal safety, which we can give ourselves through our breath. I mean, it is a magical, I mean, we can drive ourselves mad, but also we can kind of center ourselves and feel safe.
It's completely that. It's, if you think about, if you really like strip it back, your autonomic nervous system is designed for when we were hunter-gatherers on the savannas thousands of years ago, and its job is to scan your environment for cues of danger or cues of safety and shift your autonomic state depending on what it finds, whether that's moving into a high-tone sympathetic state or whether it's telling your systems in your body that it can be nice and relaxed, nice and settled. When you slow your breath down, you effectively send a signal of safety to your brain and to your nervous system, because if a lion were to walk into a room now, you wouldn't be breathing slowly, you'd be breathing. No. So when you breathe slowly, you effectively send a signal of safety throughout your system, and as a result, all the systems in your body begin to relax.
And one of the ones that's often forgotten is your digestion, isn't it? People talk about IBS and things which are stress related, but if you're constantly stressed, your digestive system goes offline too.
Yeah, and just to like map that out in a little more detail, is the dorsal vagus, when you feel safe, is actually responsible for the rest and digest function of your nervous system. It's when you're in what is called a high tone dorsal state, which is effectively shut down or freeze, that your digestion shuts off. So as I said earlier, I'm someone who has had a tendency to move towards freeze, and I've also someone who's had a lot of digestive issues as a result. So it's that high tone dorsal state that shuts off our digestion and means that it doesn't operate in a coherent and balanced way as it should. Exactly that.
And Lucy Moreau is saying, I'm practicing James's breathing. It's brilliant. First time ever I wasn't seasick on the Dublin Holyhead ferry yesterday in a very rough sea. Good for you. And Divine Hypnotherapy says, imagery versus visualization. Imagery includes all the senses, not only the visual. So it includes smells, feels, tastes. And how long do you do the visualizations, breathing work? Thank you for all your help. How often do you recommend doing breath work for a generally healthy nervous system? Can you answer two questions at once?
It's funny, it's the question I get asked the most in terms of how much and how long.
Yeah. Okay.
So my recommendation is, if you want to create change, 2 20-minute sessions a day is ideal. And that, as far as I'm aware, and in terms of what I've read, is where you will feel a definite and incremental shift in your system. If that feels like too much, then start with 2 10-minute sessions, and if that feels like too much, then start with 1 10-minute session.
Small bite size until you can kind of, and you see the difference.
Completely. Doing a little bit is better than doing nothing. So yeah. And then in terms of visualization, different people say different things in relation to this. I know specifically in relation to the work that we were briefly referring to, which is limbic system retraining, which is effectively rewiring the brain and the threat response to the brain. As far as I'm aware, a lot of those programs that we refer to talk about an hour a day. Yeah, I know definitely DNRS is, and I'm pretty sure Gupta is as well. And they tend to ask 3 20-minute sessions. But again, 20 minutes is better than nothing. So yeah.
And do you want, because I've learned from you and it's been so useful for me and I've been using it. There are different frameworks of breathing, aren't there?
Yeah.
Through numbers and time. Do you want to say like 2 or 3 of the sort of basics for someone to start?
Specifically in relation to the nervous system, or just more general, or broader generally?
Broader generally.
Okay, yeah. So I guess the sort of slightly confusing thing about breath work is you sort of go into this world and think, how many different ways can there be to breathe? And then realize that you can use the breath to calm you down, to energize you, to improve your focus, to optimize your sports performance. Some people say only breathe in and out through the nose, then people like Wim Hof breathe in and out through the mouth. And it can be a little bit of a confusing.
Tell us what you think.
So I think there's a time and a place for everything. And there's a lot of nuance, as there tends to be with most of these sort of practices. As a general rule of thumb, most people would benefit from breathing in and out through the nose and slowing their breath down. And in the world in which we live, in my opinion, most people need down-regulating practices rather than up-regulating practices.
Particularly now, when everyone's so stressed out.
Particularly now, and that isn't to say that there isn't a place for up-regulating practices and a place for practices such as Wim Hof, which is breathing in and out through the mouth. But it's important to understand where, in my opinion, where one is at in relation to their current neurophysiological health and what impact that specific breathing technique is going to have upon their body. I do work with people, and I'm working with someone at the moment who, for example, has had like a really bad experience with Wim Hof because it was just too much for his system,
overwhelming,
to where he was at that time. So if you are going to do the slightly more sort of, say, advanced up-regulating breath practices, just understand that it may not be right for you right now, and that's okay, rather than thinking there's something wrong with you, which is sort of what tends to slightly get peddled in terms of the narrative in that community. But generally speaking, breathing in and out through the nose and slowing the breath down
is the basic.
It's basic, but it's also probably the most effective and what people would most benefit from. So it's funny, I think we tend to sometimes overlook the most simple just because it really is that simple. Yeah.
Caroline Floyd has said, do you have any visualization techniques you can suggest, James? Are they on your Instagram page or your website?
There's a couple in my online studio. There's a few in there on the start of the day, I think. Yeah. And
one of the other things you talk about is the flexibility and the resilience of the autonomic nervous system, and how it can change and how that change feels. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? It's so interesting, how the brain is plastic, but also how we, that we are wired to adapt. So we learned this coping mechanism, which was to be in fight or flight, but also we can retrain ourselves.
Sure. So, yeah, I think that there's a slight sort of, I guess, misnomer in relation to the nervous system, that the more we can just calm down, the better it is. As much as an element to nervous system health is being able to calm down, as you speak to, part of improving the health of one's nervous system is increasing one's resilience. And what that effectively looks like is being able to move through and navigate this everyday world in which we live without being shaken about too much by it. And that tends to look like, I guess, two things. Is firstly understanding that the sympathetic branch of one's nervous system isn't all bad. So the fight or flight mechanism within the sympathetic branch of our nervous system is what we'd refer to as being high-tone sympathetic, and is the survival energy within the sympathetic branch of our nervous system. But we need a certain amount of healthy sympathetic energy for us to move through our day, for us to get up in the morning, for us to focus, for us to be attentive. So when we're talking about nervous system flexibility, we're talking about an ability to relax, to regulate, to be settled, but also actually to be active and engaged in the world, and being able to lean into everyday activity with a certain amount of coherence and balance too. So it's not all about just being able to lie down with one's eyes closed and be settled. It's about being able to move through the everyday experience and be settled as one does so, and that requires having a certain amount of healthy sympathetic energy, as well as a nicely toned parasympathetic nervous system as well.
Can I just say, there's been a lovely conversation as you've been talking about that Etty and Linda have talked about having chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID, and they've both been really kind of loving and gentle with each other and explaining what it is and saying welcome to the worst club ever. But there does feel like there's a community too, which feels very kind of warm. And I'm sorry that you have it. It is really a horrible, horrible illness. Do you work with that? Do you work with people who have these long-term conditions or these chronic conditions?
So most of 95% of my work is groups. It may be that I open it up to one-on-one further down the line, but at the moment that's my priority.
So how can people find you? So if someone wanted to work with you, because there's somebody asked, how can they find you, and how can they work with you?
So they can work with me either as being part of a group, which is how most people do it, or if they...
So do they find you online? They sign up?
Yeah, so it'll be either through Instagram Live or Online Studio, which is on my website. If they would like to work with me one-on-one, they're very welcome to message me. But I just don't tend to work with very many people in that way at the moment. So yeah. But I do also have, having had chronic fatigue and ME myself.
Oh, you've had it? Gosh.
Yeah, that was how I sort of got into this world, I guess.
And you don't have it now? No.
I mean, I definitely have slightly underlying like digestive things as a result of having a dysregulated nervous system, but I don't have ME yet, that's not. But I have been, I did have it to an extent where I was very much sort of like bedbound for 6 months.
Wow.
In my early 20s. So yeah, very much know how it feels.
Yeah. And so the breath work is what got you activated?
It was a piece of the puzzle. I definitely, yeah, it's a piece of the puzzle and an important part of the puzzle. I came into breath work through meditation. Meditation was a big part of the puzzle as well. And the breath for me at the time was just something which amazed me in relation to being able to change my autonomic state and how I felt. And it was particularly helpful. I had chronic pain as well, and it was particularly amazing in relation to that. But I think in my opinion, with most of these chronic illnesses, whether it's long COVID, whether it's ME, whether it's fibromyalgia, it doesn't tend to just be like one thing that is like panic fix. It tends to be sort of a bit of a holistic puzzle. Nutrition's been really important for me. So there's been lots of pieces in the puzzle.
Yeah. And can breathwork, I'm sure the answer is yes. Natasha McKeever said, can breathwork help with chronic reflux? I'm constantly on edge and anxious. I'm sure it must be able to.
Chronic
reflux.
Okay.
In your throat.
Yeah, I actually had someone, funnily enough, message me the other day to say that it's completely stopped their reflux. So definitely worth checking out. And remembering, as we said earlier in relation to digestion digestive issues, in my opinion, tend to be as a result of moving into some level of freeze response, which is effectively moving into this high tone dorsal state, and the rest and digest function within your nervous system being shut off. So anything that can help to regulate the nervous system in a better way, whether that's breath, whether that's being around people that make you feel safe, whether that's being in nature, is going to have an effect of improving your digestion, ultimately improving things like reflux or whatever else it might be.
I mean, you just sitting with you is calming, like feeling you. I mean, although we're on tiny screens and I've never physically met you, hearing how you think and how you speak and the manner and the way that you do it, I feel safe with you, but also calmed by you. So there's a way that you transmit it all through you. It isn't, it's a real, that you're the real deal.
Appreciate it. And I feel the same way. Thank you.
So people talk about But my final question is, there are many different types of breathing. Maybe should we do 1 minute to end? 1 minute or 2 minutes of breathing to end our session?
Yeah. I'd love to also, if possible, ask you a question as well. Which
well, ask me a question and then we'll do the breathing.
And then we'll do it. So one thing that I guess I'm sitting with at the moment is I've been doing a lot of something called somatic experiencing, which is like, for people who don't know, is a school of body psychotherapy. And
you've been doing it as a patient or training as a
patient. And there's an interesting school of thought within somatic experiencing in relation to the importance of being with the feeling and not shifting one state. And I think my feeling at the moment is there's a nuance to it, and that there's an importance in relation to being able to self-regulate and shift one state. But when is it also important to be with the feeling, if being with the feeling allows what might be sort of like underlying dysregulation or trauma in the body to be processed and cleared, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. I mean, these things are nuanced. I think the big thing with our body and our emotions and our feelings and coming through is that there's movement. So if you get sorry, I've got a cough. If you get stuck in a particular state, like a body sensation gives you a feeling and gives you a thought, and you get kind of locked in it and you ruminate on that sends your stress levels high and you get locked in it. But if you can allow the feeling to come through, the thoughts come through, name it, it comes, the process comes through your system, and it will shift you to the parasympathetic to feel calmer. Mm-hmm. And in that process is the agent of change of how we adapt to the knowledge. So the things that we do to block the pain are often the things that do us harm over time. Mm. And we block maybe the story or the event or the person or the feeling. So when we move in and out through that state, we allow ourselves to adapt and learn and face the reality of our new circumstance or face the reality of our new knowledge. Mm. So it's very much in a way like the autonomic nervous system. It's the movement, it's the up and down that we need rather than being locked in one state. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think the interesting for me is to what extent the breath then can play a role in almost like, is the breath blocking the potential ability to be with the pain?
So I think, so say somebody died and you have an image of them, that they've just died, and you have that image. You see the image and you remember them, and you feel the pain of the loss of them and the reality that the death is permanent, that they're not coming back. And as you name it, you can say it or write it, as you name it, that comes through you, and then you can use the breath to take you out of the intensity of the pain, to kind of release you into a calmer state.
Makes sense.
And then another thought may come and you'll be thrown back. And so you can use the breath to support you through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, it feels like I think the word titration.
I don't know that word.
I think it's the word used, I can't remember, I think Peter Levine uses it, who is effectively created somatic experiencing, which is effectively coming in and out of being with the feeling. So you might come into something, feel it, and if it then starts becoming overwhelming and too much for your system, then you then come out.
And in the trade, you'd also call it a window of tolerance.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's exposure. So you need to. So if you'd have prolonged grief disorder if you just locked yourself in the pain, or locked yourself out of the pain. Yeah. So it's the going in, allowing a little bit that you can cope with, and then having a mechanism, a safety of another person, co-regulation, a therapist, or the breath that takes you out of it. Mm.
Yeah, it feels like such a dance.
It is a dance. That's a
yeah.
lovely word for it, and people talk about it as a dance.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think it's why this work, and as I guess the sort of further I go into it and learn about it myself personally, is like it feels a lot more. It just feels very nuanced in relation to sort of when one dives in, when one shifts one state, when one is with the feeling, and I think that also comes back to what we're saying about or developing that somatic awareness and being able to map one's own nervous system and
And where
understanding
it's in your body.
yeah, which is, I guess, comes back to why the breath can be such a helpful tool, because it sort of provides that bridge.
It does provide the bridge, and it can enable you to dare to feel the pain when you know that you can have a mechanism that can support you. I mean, I think people really help you. Being with safe people can help you, but if you're on your own, knowing that you can use your breath to shift you, I think can really help too.
Yeah, agreed.
Should we do 1 minute of breath now?
Do 1 minute.
Or 2 minutes? You decide.
No, we'll do a nice short little reset to end the session.
Okay.
So just taking a moment to close the eyes, to come into the body. And just take a moment before connecting to the breath to notice how the body feels. The sensations, the feelings. Just noticing how the conversation has landed in your body somatically and what you can feel as a result. And then with me, take one deep breath in through the nose, a big sigh out through the mouth. And let's actually do one more like that. So a deep breath in through the nose, big sigh out through the mouth. And then just place your hands wherever it feels most comfortable on your body. So you might put one hand over your belly, one hand over your chest. And just take a moment to connect to the breath, to notice how the breath feels in your body. So notice which areas of your body rise and inflate on the inhale, and which areas of your body deflate and gently fall away upon the exhale. And then gently, I just want you to start slowing the exhale down. So paying particular attention to slowing the exhale right down. If the inhale lengthens as a result too, then that's okay. But focusing on lengthening the exhale specifically. And then with me, letting your hands rest gently somewhere aside from your body. Maybe on your lap, maybe down by your sides if you're lying down. And take one more deep breath in through the nose. Big sigh out through the mouth. And then nice and slowly bring a little bit of movement back into your fingers. A little bit of movement back into the toes. Gently opening the eyes. And coming back.
That was great. Loved that. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So lovely seeing you, and I hope I'll see you again soon. And just say one more where everybody can find you. They can find you on Breath with James.
Yeah, so you can find me even through Instagram. Do normally a couple of live sessions a week on Instagram, which is available to everyone. And then if you want to go slightly further or practice in your own time, I have an online studio on my website, which is breathworkjames.com, and you can find that through the bio on my Instagram too.
Brilliant. And thank you everyone who joined us and for messaging and for participating. It means a lot to both of us that you join us, and everybody have a good evening. Lots of love.
Thanks guys. Thanks so much, Julia.
Thanks.
I really appreciate it.
Lovely seeing you, James.
Lovely seeing you. All the best.
Yeah, bye.